moment. All right. Okay, welcome everyone to our session. This is part of the resistance and repression, psychology of resistance in repressive and violent contexts virtual meeting series. And today, as you know, we'll be focusing on repression in the context of the climate movement. Just briefly, a few words, because we have many new faces here today, which is great. So usually we are a smaller group of social psychologists who study collective action and other forms of resistance in the context of violence and repression. And we look at how those contexts affect people's decisions to engage in resistance or how they engage in resistance, whether repression is effective and demobilizing or not, how we can counter it. Those are the kinds of questions that we usually address, oftentimes in other types of contexts like ethnic, national violence, state repression. And so this is the first session today that focuses on the climate movement. And I think our group today is also much broader beyond social psychologists, which is also nice. It is, we decided to do this session because of what we're observing in the world, and I'll send just a link to the chat. We'll hear much more about context, but as many of you know, repression against climate activists has been increasing. The measures and punishments are getting more severe, and this, in the context of the climate disaster also getting more severe, so it doesn't make a lot of sense, although it does, of course, make sense from the perspective of those in power who want things to stay as they are. So today's session will focus on that context, and we have a so-called co-production roundtable, where the idea is that we put social science research and knowledge from the ground, what climate activists are doing, in conversation with each other. So we have 6 climate activists with us in this group. If I were more technically skilled, I could maybe highlight them on the Zoom, but I don't know how to do that. So we will introduce everyone in a moment, and then you'll see who we are talking to. We also have Dr. Ayanian, whom you will find in the audience, and she is one of the leading social psychologists who has started working on collective action in context of repression, and she will be giving a brief overview of what we think we know about the psychology of resistance in repressive contexts, and then activists will be asked to respond to that, say if we're on the right track, if it aligns with what you're observing in your work, and also what you think would be most useful for us researchers to focus on moving forward, so that the knowledge we produce is informed by your insights and could potentially be useful to your work. In addition to that, we have a nice international audience, and I always like to know, or we always like to know, whom we're talking to and with. So while I continue with the introductions, if you like, it would be great if you could just put briefly in the chat where you are located and what you do. If you're a researcher, an activist, just maybe 2-3 words so that we know who's with us in the room, and then you can look at it as I continue to talk here later on. So just briefly about the structure of this session, we will first take about 20 to 25 minutes to introduce the 6 activists here, and each of them will say a little bit about their context, the kind of work they do if they want to disclose, and then the repression they have been witnessing in that context, as well as how they see that affecting either individual activists or the movement, the climate movement in general. Then after that, Dr. Ayanian will give us a brief 12, she said, minute overview of the social psychology of resistance, collective action, and repressive contexts. And then following that presentation, we'll have the panelists, the activists, discuss what they heard and how that aligns with what they're seeing, how they think we should move forward. Then at the end, we will have a little bit more time to bring in audience discussions, but today it will be, because we have so many panelists with us, there will be a little less audience discussion, but you are invited to use our Jamboard, and Fuad will put the link into the chat to write down your observations, your comments, and also any questions you have. So we like to use this Jamboard as a form of collective note-taking, collective brainstorming, and we'll be collecting all of the questions there and then later bundling them and asking the panelists to respond. So Fuad already put the link in the chat, but we will continue to put the link in the chat every now and then so that you find it and you can just open it up to slide, I think 6 it is, the last slide. There's one slide where you can just use the sticky notes there on the Jamboard and note your questions and comments. All right, last comment is that I am recording the session so that others who can't be with us today but would like to hear it can access it. If there's anything you want to say off record, still with people in the room but not recorded, just message me and I'll pause the recording anytime if you like. All right, I think that's all for now. So let's get started. I will, and thank you everyone again for coming. I will introduce the panelists in alphabetical order of their last name. So we have 6, and the first one is Dr. Marianne Grau, who is actually also a professor of theology, however, and a climate activist with Scientist Rebellion, Extinction Rebellion, Greenpeace, a few other local groups, based in Norway, but also with some experience in Germany and the US, if I understood correctly. So Marianne, please start.
Yes. So just briefly, I think what I'm noticing is that the repression is in Norway is still subtle when this is not, we're not on the level of course global witness who counts killed activists. So we are still at a level where nobody's harmed, but there's a kind of a corporate capture, especially in Norway, that's going on that has to do with Equinor. And kind of buying their way into projects, research projects, student parties in Trondheim and various other things. So we are and we are also noticing that spectators are getting more violent, attacking directly activists that are in particular have at the World Ski Cup have tried to get on the camera, and there's actual volunteers who are then more violent than police. So the police kind of know where their limits are, but the volunteers very often can be quite violent. So I don't want to go on for too long, but I think a lot of it is also psychological. In Norway is a culture where you don't really want to be critiquing the government all that vocally. It's very much of a code of silence, I think. A lot of also psychologists that I know here at the University of Oslo do not dare show up at actions. They will talk to me privately and say that, well, we're supposed to be neutral, and there's a kind of a academic etiquette that people think that they're supposed to not take sides or something like that. So it's something also that keeps people. There's very much is a kind of internalized, if you can say. I don't know if it makes sense to call it internalized. I might be, and it's a little bit like people pre-tenure people, but it's more, it's more than that, and it affects also people who have permanent jobs. I think I'll probably stop there for now. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Marianne. That resonates, and I can only imagine if they're doing that with climate, how is it with Palestine right now? All right, our next panelist is Tim Martin, who is based in the US and with Declare Emergency, I think by training an architect or engineer, sorry, I'm probably getting this wrong, and also a father and climate activist is how he wanted to be introduced. So Tim, go ahead.
Thank you. Yes, Tim, I started my journey in climate activism with just volunteering for my community with the local tree ordinances. That's what first got me off the sofa when I saw like whole city blocks clear cut, like 2-meter diameter, 8-foot diameter trees, real elders in our community who have been around before the city was even established in the 1700s, getting clear cut for development at all cost. The city government is just letting developers colonize the town that I've lived in for more than 20 years. And so, yeah, it was about trees for me. And then when not a lot of people were showing up for these sort of city council presentations. We were trying to get people to just slow down and look at the full cost of what we're losing when we take out trees because of all the gifts that they provide to our community. I put together a film series, and it was called a tree film series, and it started with A Life on Our Planet with David Attenborough. And then the next one was Breaking Boundaries, the Science of Our Planet. And so we had just a wonderful overview effect, and it ended with Adam McKay's Don't Look Up film. And when everybody was thinking, haha, that was a good political satire comedy rather than what it was designed to be, which is a wake-up call and an allegory, I put together the film series and showed it, and nobody came. Everybody's too busy in this system of scarcity that holds us all back and keeps us all struggling for survival while the rich get richer. And it's like that by design because, yeah, I met Declare Emergency and I was like, whoa, people are paying attention. I started following climate scientists. We may be out of time to turn this thing around, according to some. If you look at the amount of CO2 that has been in the atmosphere before, like paleoclimate data before, like 33 million years ago, before there was ice caps formed at the poles, we had the Earth leaving hothouse conditions where life, except for hot loving bacteria, could survive, but life was just getting started, and well, at least one version of it, simple versions, and then yeah, we're like headed into that neighborhood as we speak, and yet nobody is talking about the climate emergency. And so thankful to find Declare Emergency. And my first action was a roadblock. Second action was somebody who's here had signed up to do an art action, and my background is in art and design. And so I was like, yes, and that's where I met Joanna. And then we did the National Gallery of Art Little Dancer action. And right away, the director of the gallery said, vandals. You know, that wasn't a protest. That was some kind of yeah, vandalism. and and here we are, you know, our cultural institution director, the National Endowment of the Arts say that the climate emergency is the most pressing issue. Apparently the director of the museum didn't get the memo. Or perhaps she was influenced by the chairman of the board, who on the day that we did our action, The Guardian came out with an expose of the Carlyle Group. And it's one of the world's biggest fossil fuel financiers on the planet. The co-founder of the Carlyle Group is the chairman of the board of the National Gallery of Art. So, you know, of course, they're not going to want to talk about the reason we did that action. And yeah, I'll just say that things seem to be going okay for our case. I just don't think we're a strong enough campaign yet to get the attention of the powerful people in control yet, but that could change. We'll see. And I'll pass there. Jeff, thank you.
Thank you, Tim. And anyone who's not in the US, if you're not familiar with the case, you can just Google Tim and Joanna's name and you'll find a nice picture of them sitting in the gallery doing their action. The next panelist, activist is Janine O'Keefe, who is a mother, an activist with Scientist Rebellion, MR, I'm not sure if that was Mother Rebellion or Money Rebellion, there are two, FFF, Extinction Rebellion, and then AV and LG, based in Sweden, but also active with civil disobedience in Denmark, Germany, and Australia. Janine, welcome, and please go ahead.
Hi, thank you. Can you hear me? Is it clear?
Sorry?
Yeah, great. So the microphone is working well. Yeah, good. So yes, I probably started with 350 back in 2017, 2016. And but there was never any civil disobedience actions. And then when Fridays for Future came with Greta Thunberg doing civil disobedience for the year 9 not going to school, I was very pleased about that. I come from a society of long history of civil disobedience. In Melbourne is a like Glasgow, I don't know which the best city to explain in the US, but it's a manufacturing city, so therefore civil disobedience and union rights are very strong within that society. And so when Extinction Rebellion came in 2018, I also jumped on the board with stronger disobedience with roadblocks. The first year of Extinction Rebellion had hardly any repression, but after COVID, the repression really hit. So we were being charged with sabotage just for doing equivalent roadblocks only 2 years earlier. And also then I joined Vollhardt, which is restore the wetlands, and did a freeway roadblock there where we were then charged with sabotage. So I think Sweden probably had the highest number of cases for sabotage convictions and charges around the world. Once again, we do not have a similar situation where there's violence from the police, as you can see from many countries historically. But we have seen an acceleration in repression. There's no question of that. And you also see it in Germany and Denmark. I think in the smaller countries, you see it a lot less. So in Germany, you actually saw what I would say, I read an article which I thought really well described it, where there was a lot of money coming in, I think, from US right-wing politics towards setting up sort of very much stronger right-wing politics, which then actually encouraged, as Marion said, people who owned the cars to get out and pull people off the road by the hair. Like, you know, that's the sort of repression you actually see. And we saw in Sweden where 2 or 3 people picked up a person from Restore the Wetlands and threw them over the barrier, and she broke her collarbone. She's actually a professor emeritus, so of anthropology, so from Stockholm University. So you see the repression, but you don't see it from the police. The police in Germany, though, have actually seen similar things like and I was with an Action, a Scientist Rebellion there in Germany, where we blocked a freeway, and they used at least on 2 of the 8 of us, the repression where they bend the arm so it'll break if you don't move. So that repression has clearly been shown. But like, you know, to keep this in perspective, Uganda now has 11 activists on trial and will go to prison for this, and all they did was trying to present a petition to their government. You know, that was trivial, peaceful demonstration. Maybe I can leave it there. Australia, I do maybe should comment between each of the states. Australia has 7 states, and each of the states, rather than a federal level, jumping in with much more stronger repression. For example, there was like a $200 fine for doing civil disobedience in the street with a roadblock, and now in Victoria, I think that's been increased to $20,000, and almost every state has lifted up a significant change in the amount of repression, as well as probably going from 10 to 6 months in jails to 5 years in jail. I'm generalizing there because there's several states and they're all different, but the repression has become extreme.
Thanks so much, Janine. And thank you also for mentioning a few other contexts that are not represented today, including Uganda. You'll notice when we're done presenting all the panelists, it's skewed towards global north and Western context, which is not what I had intended and not usually how we conceptualize the panels, but it's simply how it turned out. So I think another follow-up session will probably be planned at some point, looking more at inviting more activists from global South context. So thank you for mentioning that. And whoever has knowledge from those places should please also bring that in as we discuss. Our next panelist is Tatiana Serian, who is one of my comrades at Scientist Rebellion and is also part of Extinction Rebellion and Money Rebellion based in the US, but also lived in the UK and has experience with the repression in the UK. Tatiana, please go ahead.
Am I audible? Yes, okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Tatiana Seryan. I'm Armenian, born in Istanbul, and I immigrated to the States when I was 2 or 3 years old with my parents. So there's a sort of history of sort of intergenerational like trauma and repression and those stories of resistance. I think that informs my background greatly and informs my fight currently. I think I'd always been a protester throughout my life, and I started really organizing probably in 2017 when Brett Kavanaugh was being considered for the Supreme Court. And I was part of the whole like Washington, D.C. occupation because of the sort of white supremacist ethno-Christian fascism that he represented with the backing of like the Heritage Society and et cetera. And so the Federalists. And so I came to climate. I mean, I was always aware of climate. I think I went into climate organizing in about 2019 and helped launch Money Rebellion with Gail Bradbrook, and then have served in lots of different roles and arms of Extinction Rebellion, specifically helping them mobilize a digital rebellion against the police courts police crime sentencing courts bill, which was the sort of anti-protester bill that rolled out in 2022. And I think what I've seen in terms of people's reaction to repression, and I'm really interested to hear, obviously, what the social scientists here have to say, but I think in terms of, so what we know of like the Duchenne formula that governments and corporations use to classify activists is like into 4 categories, is like idealists or opportunists or the realists or the radicals. I think from my experience, people react based on where they are as an activist. So I think the first 3 are probably quite sensitive to repression, and they find that it has a sort of demoralizing or discouraging impact. But the radicals are, you know, the ones who see the rot in the system, and nothing can deter them because they will never unsee that. And so repression, I would imagine, and I'm again curious to hear, I would imagine acts as a galvanizing force, because if you feel like you're on the side of justice and you're fighting for something that you believe in, people repressing you even further, and you know, especially in unjust ways as our governments have been doing, it just turns into this catalyzing sense of, you know, a transgression with every moment that you breathe, you know, this unfairness against you. And if you're already aware, and if you're already an activist, that's going to do nothing but compound and I would think exponentialize your group determination to fight against that. So I will leave that there because I want to be sensitive to time. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tatiana. That's actually really interesting. You'll see when we present the research, we tend to do studies that kind of take the average and generalize across responses, but we do also have methodologies that look at profiles of activists and different, or you know, people and depending on different traits and characteristics. So that would actually be a really interesting first research idea coming out of this, to look not at the general responses, but based on people's where they are as activists. Thank you. Our next panelist, we have 2 more, is Joanna Altman-Smith, whom Tim already mentioned. And Joanna is a professional citizen and activist here in the US. Go ahead, Joanna.
Good morning, everyone. Hi, I'm in Brooklyn, New York. I have been an activist, you know, for my whole life. I grew up in Berkeley, California, where it's kind of in the blood. Lots of good on the street, in your face kind of, I would say like response to, you know, obvious social issues, early environmental awareness, having grown up in a beautiful place, constantly under threat. I've lived on the East Coast for most of my adult life, and I got pretty involved with local politics. Once my kids were born, I served on the kind of the lowest level of New York City politics called the community board, served on different committees at my local park and with my even my local police department back when I thought they could be reformed. Like Tatiana, I got my first on the ground nonviolent civil disobedience training in DC during the Kavanaugh hearings. Really felt compelled to put my body on the line when I saw that my personal rights were going to be affected by these choices. This is our United States Supreme Court that makes the final call on all of our rights here in the country, and these more and more reactionary, conservative, oppressive people being appointed to it for life. Say my first environmental nonviolent civil disobedience came about during the pandemic, training with XR NYC. We're here in New York City, the financial capital of the world. All of the banks that are over investing continuously in fossil fuels are here. So it's a great place to put your body in the way of business as usual. Got a little bit more bold by going out to Line 3 when there was a call from Indigenous activists out there for general population to come support their efforts to block that pipeline. And that is where I saw a big difference in how the community out there was being treated by the police compared to how we were treated in New York City. We got strafed by helicopters. People were violently pulled off of things that they were attached to. That got me thinking about how different populations are treated. Here I am with my privilege in this, metropolitan city with my skin color and my age. Look at how our brown and Black brothers and sisters are being treated. And that kind of opened my mind to what's going on in the global South. That really sped up my activism to the point where I was ready to throw it all down with Tim at the National Gallery. Our response to what we perceive to be, just the grave injustice in the way that we are consuming products in the North compared to what is happening in the frontline communities that are bearing the brunt of the crisis. These are facts, right? I misspoke. I said, we're perceiving it. We're not perceiving it. They're facts, right? So I just feel like we all have to do what we can here in the global North to get the message out, regardless of the repression. And what Tatiana mentioned as well, I have found it to be galvanizing. Like for myself personally, I've taken a step back from my on the ground organizing. I haven't been showing up in person because we're facing these outrageous prison sentences and unbelievably high fines for this action. But what I have seen is that all of our allies and colleagues in the climate movement have seen this coming down on us as individuals and said, no, they're saying no way, they're stepping up. They're really, they're manifesting much more than we could have as individuals. And that's what the movement's all about. So I see it as, it's a very interesting, I can't wait to hear the conversation today because it has had these major individual impacts on me psychologically. I know there are a lot of psychologists in the house, but politically, I feel like it's just more and more momentum coming out of the repression, which you wouldn't expect. But yeah, let's get on with the convo.
Yes, and we'll definitely hear more from Irene about how it can also galvanize and not just repress action. Thank you so much, Joanna, also again for bringing in the issue of how this differs by geographic location and race, because that is something I didn't manage to incorporate into the panel, but I'm grateful for anyone who keeps that on top of our minds, that repression will affect people differently in different places and based on their backgrounds. All right, last but not least, Jay Waxy, is that how you pronounce your last name? Yes, thank you, who is an organizer and activist with the Seven Circles Alliance and also a scientist and engineer whom we still have to recruit into Scientist Rebellion. based here in the US. Go ahead, Jay.
Hey everyone, so glad to be here. Right now I'm also in Brooklyn, but I'm usually down in Washington, D.C., what's called Washington, D.C. on unceded Piscataway lands. But yeah, I've been an activist pretty much exclusively for about a year, at a wide range of different actions. The first really of a spicy variety was a blockade of Joe Manchin's coal plant, one of the dirtier coal plants in the country. He's not only a senator of West Virginia, who's supposed to be representing people and their well-being, but just operates and takes in so much money from this coal plant. So we directly tried to blockade it. Had some good success, aligned with the Poor People's campaign out there. Have done a lot of action between that one and one I was just in court for yesterday here in New York. We from then have done a lot of action with Climate Defiance, some other groups, and Seven Circles Alliance, who I'm with now. We did an action on what's called Thanksgiving here in the United States, and we blockaded the Macy's parade that's been going on for I think about 74 years, just this real capitalist cultural event, and we decided to disrupt it because disrupting business as usual is absolutely, I think, what needs to happen for change. And we got out in front of the Sinclair Oil dinosaur balloon to help show this connection, but we really were out there motivated primarily for the liberation of Palestine and the planet, because these are connected fights, as I think we're really seeing and learning that the same forces that are willing to colonize and take all measures to do what they want with land are the same ones that are willing to do whatever they want for resources and jungles and extraction. And so we've really been advancing where we can go with this action. And I'm have 5 arrests this year, but the overall repression specifically for me has been somewhat low. So I'm excited to learn from others that have it in a, say, more legal sense, and from around the country that I've been hearing in that sense. So really grateful for the conversation. I guess just one last thing is that I think exactly this opportunities that repression provides to be ready enough to use it as an opportunity to keep moving more attention to these fights. And I know for sure it galvanizes us. And an example of like Steven Donziger, if y'all know him, some of these crazy charges that are getting leveled in so many different directions. Also, if you disrupt the construction of a pipeline, that feels like a category where you start getting just the most insane charges. So just seeing this difference between cultural and more economic is been a big thing recently. And yeah, how privilege and our team core folds into it. So it's been so interesting. So really grateful to be here, and glad for the combo.
All right, thank you everyone, and again for agreeing to be part of this. So now we'll move to Dr. Ayanian's presentation. Dr. Ayanian is affiliated with Bielefeld University in Germany and Yerevan State University in Armenia. And as I said before, has been one of the first social psychologists to start researching the effects of repression on collective action. So she will be giving us a brief overview of what we know or think we know in social psychology about the psychological impact of repression. And I think many of you already mentioned some of the issues that we study. So Irene, you should be able to share your screen. Please go ahead. Oh, and sorry, once again, the link to the Jamboard is in the chat. So as you listen, you are welcome to put any comments, thoughts, questions into the Jamboard that we can address them later, and also just have it as a collective brainstorming tool.
Thank you so much, Johanna. Thank you very much for having me here. I look forward for the discussion. So as Johanna mentioned, in this presentation, I will very briefly summarize what we know about the social psychological processes underlying individuals' engagement in peaceful collective action while facing harsh repression from the authorities. So in other words, what are the micro-level processes underlying the link between repression and peaceful collective action? And to this end, I will summarize the work I've been doing with my collaborators throughout these years, and also a very recent literature search we've conducted. But before we start with the research, let me just give you a brief overview of the current general social psychological research, or the antecedents, the motivations we look at when we study engagement in collective action. In a nutshell, very briefly, this work has highlighted 4 important psychological factors or groups of factors as important and motivating engagement. The first being the emotional component of the perceived grievances, whether being social or political. And we notably looked at anger and outrage as motivators of collective action, and fear, on the other hand, would be the inhibitory emotion. You have the instrumental factors, where we look at the likelihood of the protest movement to achieve the social or political goals, and that would be the political efficacy. We also have the efficacy of the movement to consolidate itself, to become strengthened its identity. And the last one would be participative efficacy, which is one's own contribution to the efforts of the movement to achieve social or political goals. The cornerstone of mobilization is considered to be politicized identity, which is the extent to which one identifies with the protest movement. And the last are the moral considerations. In particular, I look at moral obligation, which is one's sense of responsibility to take action. Sorry. Now, let's explore what the research can tell us about the link between repression and collective action. What are the main findings? So I don't go into methodology, but since you've mentioned the differentiations between whether you are whether you are at the beginning of your activism or whether you are a radical, I would say I would like to highlight that most of this the research that I will be summarizing have been conducted on activists of different levels of activism, but also in the literature you find research conducted with student samples or the general population. Now, in our studies, consistent with the backlash effect that you've also mentioned, participants who perceive higher level of risks, so and these risks being arrested or being injured, as well as being killed, because I looked at contexts such as Egypt and Russia, you will find that those who perceive higher risks also reported higher levels of willingness to engage in collective action. And this link is through strengthening identification with the protest movement, certain types of efficacies, and the moral concerns. And if you look at the literature, you will find mixed results. Some would report no relationship between repression and collective action. Some would report positive correlations, but also experiments. So a causation. Sorry. When you look at the qualitative studies, you will find that they provide a more nuanced picture, whereby first, every single interviewee would be aware of the risks associated with their activism. However, these risks never diverted them from staying active or becoming even more active. However, research also specifies that some people, even though they would continue their activism can take different forms. For instance, they would become active in ways that would protect their identity. So if you are active online, you will try to use fake accounts, for instance, or you would engage in activities that are self-censored. So you would engage in activities that you are able to defend in court. And within the same movement, in this case, the researcher looked at the Muslim Brotherhood. People respond differently, as you've mentioned, to repression. Some would become less confrontational, so more peaceful. Some would become more confrontational or even disengaged, so political apathy. However, collectively, we can say that there's comparatively less evidence of repression leading to deterrence, and there's more evidence of a backlash effect of repression at the individual level. Now, what about the link between repression and the motivation, the various motivations of collective action? If we look at the emotional part, my research, but also the literature confirms a strong relation between repression and anger. So the more you feel repression, the angrier you feel. But also there is, when it comes to fear, there is evidence showing that the more you feel, the more you perceive repression, the more you feel fear. My research also confirms a positive relation between repression and identity consolidation efficacy. So the likelihood of solidifying and strengthening the identity of the movement. A positive relation with participative efficacy, so your own contribution to the movement, a stronger politicized identity, and a greater moral obligation. Now, the literature also highlighted repression to lead to different other types of emotions, including hate and vengeance, feelings of being dehumanized and being laughed at in response, of course, to police hostility, and feelings of shame, humiliation, and again, being laughed at. Now, when it comes to political efficacy, so the likelihood of achieving your political or social goals, we don't have consistent results. According to context, you can find that repression can increase political efficacy, decrease, or there's absolutely no relation between the two. And in our review, we only found one article looking at the relation between these two, and it did not have, so repression did not have any impact on political efficacy. Now, what are the motivators of collective action under repressive context? If you look at anger, there is strong evidence showing that participants who feel more anger also report higher levels of willingness to engage, but also engagement in collective action. And some of this is due to the role of your moral concerns or your moral obligation. The higher you feel, the higher you report anger, the higher you report moral obligation, and this moral obligation leads to a higher willingness to engage or engagement in collective action. And again, our review strongly confirmed the role of anger in motivating one's engagement. For fear, we have inconsistent results. In my studies, again, according to the context, we had either no relationship between fear and collective action. In certain cases, we had a positive, and certain cases, negative relationship. And the review also supports the inconclusive role of fear in deterring collective action under repressive conditions. So collectively, we can conclude fear is unrelated to collective action, and repression has an overall positive link to collective action. And the pathways of identity efficacy concerns, mainly participative and identity consolidation efficacies, and moral obligations have a stronger backlash role than the inhibiting effect of fear. Now, what are other emotional antecedents of collective action? The literature highlighted the role of hope, feelings of hate and vengeance, and feelings of shame, humiliation, and being laughed at. On the other side, the flip side of hope, despair, is associated with political apathy. For efficacy beliefs, even though we have lots of literature in social psychology and context, in Western context, where it's more democratic and liberal, when the topics are not environmental or they're not about Palestine, for instance, political efficacy is considered to be a good predictor of collective action. However, under repressive conditions, the results are contradictory. Some you would have positive, some absolutely no relationship, or even negative. So what we can say is that political efficacy seems to be less relevant for protesters to engage in high-risk activism. Regarding identity consolidation efficacy, we find strong evidence, highlighting participants who report higher levels of identity consolidation efficacy also report higher levels of engagement or willingness to engage in collective action. So what we can say is that this goal of building a protest movement, strengthening a protest movement, seems to be far more important than the final political or social goal activists can have in mind. Participative efficacy as well is has a positive role in motivating individuals to get engaged. Identity as well. So the more you report identifying with the protest movement, the higher your willingness to get engaged and be engaged. And this is in line with the literature in social psychology, whereby, as I said before, it is considered a politicized identity, or your identification with the protest movement is considered to be the cornerstone of mobilization. And finally, moral obligation, your moral considerations, your sense of responsibility and duty to take action is a consistent motivator of collective action under repressive conditions throughout the contexts I've looked at. And some of the motivations I've covered before, so anger and participative efficacy, actually lead to higher levels of one's moral concerns or moral obligation, which leads to your higher levels of motivation, higher levels of willingness to engage or actual engagement in collective action. So what can we conclude? There is a backlash effect of repression, and this backlash effect received the most support. And the key motivators of collective action that we are familiar with in social psychological research do meaningfully shape one's intentions to engage in collective action under repressive conditions. And
All right.
that's it. I hope I was quick enough, Johanna.
Yes,
I tried.
absolutely. That was amazing. Thank you so much, Ayanian. All right. So now in the next phase, I'll ask the activists, the panelists, to comment on the presentation in terms of whether or not it resonates with what you're seeing on the ground, but also if you think that we may be missing some important piece, and which next steps in this research you think would be important to take, especially from the perspective of what would actually be useful knowledge for activists and us as a society to have. And then finally, if any of you would also like to comment on this distinction between more conventional type of action that shouldn't be repressed by the law in theory, but we know it still often is, versus civil disobedience, where activists are knowingly taking risk, and that's part of the calculation, but the severity of the repression may still have that kind of effect of outrage and galvanizing, as Irene showed in the findings, and as you also discussed previously. That would also, I think, be an interesting question to discuss, and I saw a few comments on that in the chat, since we have activists here who mostly engage in civil disobedience, but of course nowadays even protests sometimes are attacked and people get charged with misdemeanors or such. All right, so those were a lot of additional questions, but really you can take anything that spoke to you in the presentation or that you would like us as researchers to know moving forward with this work. And I won't call on you, so any of the activists, if you would like to just go ahead, unmute and speak, and you can kind of take turns or speak also with each other. We don't necessarily need to go around one by one. Who would like to start? Janine.
I turned off my mic, or turn on the mic, so thank you. My comment was more about the fear side, because I've felt that what I'm seeing is that we have, we often talk about don't use fear to motivate the individual as an activist, but fear is a great motivator when it's directed towards the very wealthy, when we're actually picking on, for example, private jets. So I'm just wondering how you weave those two different as a motivator in the action or the actual achieving the efficacy from your target perspective. So it's more of a question to Aaron.
Yeah, so Janine, the sound is a bit difficult, but you're asking about not the activists, but the people who are being targeted by activists. Was that your what your question
Yes.
was on? Interesting,
So
right? I'm not
is
sure.
the voice better now?
Yeah.
Okay,
okay.
so
Sorry, go ahead.
So Aaron, your focus was on how fear affected the individual, others joining in action, but I'm actually asking how fear affects the target. Yes.
Okay, and I think we'll maybe collect questions and then perhaps Ayanian can respond at the end. And I'm not sure we actually have any insights into the targets of activists, but that is definitely a very important question for future research. And I know some research addresses how observers respond to disruptive action, for example, versus other types of action. But yeah, so we'll collect some questions. Is there anything else you wanted to comment on, Janine, or was that your main question?
The second part would be actually that, because there's a lot of money available for right-wing ideas, that basically any form of radical action or radical from environmentalists is actually, as I say, radical or extreme. We're often classified in that box, whereas you can actually have actions of far greater, far more extreme, burning of things for the Muslim, for example, reactions to burning of Muslims, their Quran, etc. And then there was a burning of police cars here. That reaction was not nearly as potentially harsh. So there's actually a lot of media using the term that we're radical and we're extreme, and yet I don't think we are. We're relatively very peaceful. So, have you got research comparing our type of actions with more radical actions of other groups which are actually more violent?
Yeah, thank you. That's again an interesting point about the perception of these actions. So we'll continue collecting comments from the panelists, and then maybe Ayanian can say a few words at the end, or others also. Yeah, feel free to jump in. Marian unmuted, and then Joanna. Sorry. Yeah, go ahead. First Marian, and then Joanna.
I realized I blew right past the prompt and didn't talk about my personal history into it, and I just wanted to quickly go into that and then make some comments. So my background as a Christian has meant that for me the cross has always been a sign of colonial repression, so that if I live in consistency with the cross, then there is I need to look at violence that happens towards people and planet and creation. I've always voted green, but I did get more radicalized in Berkeley as I'm a professor, and when my students let themselves get arrested in Berkeley, I said, why are you wasting your time? My activism is in the classroom, right? And so I did first get on the street, actually occupy Wall Street, then Black Lives Matter, and actually I was at Standing Rock even for a short period, and I'm assuming I'm not the only one. And that really changed my life in some me and Ocasio-Cortez had a sort of conversion experience in many ways there, and that was a pipeline protest. However, I have not actually been engaging myself in active blocking and civil disobedience. I always have green roles, and that has something to do with migration status. And I think that that is an aspect that we need to look at, because I always was not a citizen in the US. And I am not a citizen here in Norway. So there's something around that. And so now, but then, you know, over time, I just started realizing that the teaching alone isn't enough activism, and that I need to spend some of my time and my kind of yeah, just so. And now it's essentially my entire life, and I've been able to combine research and activism, and I have a fellowship now coming in Princeton this fall on actually psychology, climate psychology, and activism and theology. So sorry about that. I didn't say that earlier. Now I said it. I was really struck by the anger part because that's my primary emotion, and I think that's so. We have a climate grief group here in Norway, and when we did share, we use you know, like Joanna Macy's work to kind of work to reconnect, to go through that. And I remember sitting there and saying something about anger, and I thought I must be the only one, right? But everyone, even the people that are gentle, you know, kind of really that anger is really that. So I think that what Aaron was saying in terms of anger and how that is this motivator, more than anything, well, for me, more than anything else, is something that I observe. And I'm actually, and if anybody has resources or want to work together, I'm working on an article actually on anger and hope and the intersection between them, because I think there's some kind of dynamic there. And I put some, so I want to talk more about anger and this relationship. And I want to, and also I think that the high risk and low risk. A lot of activists here in Norway are not understanding why we are so few people. And I wonder if there's an inverse relationship with the risk. I put it on the Jamboard in terms of if there's a low risk, so physically at least, then somehow there isn't enough motivation. On the other hand, there's there's this blanket of disapproval towards civil disobedience, and we've been able to shift the discourse in Norway from like, oh, civil disobedience, you people are terrorists, right? Like civil disobedience is not even like something you can do, and then you're like you're questioning the very fabric of society if you're, you know, because you're somehow not trusting the system. Basically, that's kind of how it works here. And so there's a very high threshold for people to get over that towards civil disobedience. And the Extinction Rebellion activists, in my context, get more flack. We have also indigenous activists, the Sami, that have been occupying here and there, and they are always working together, and there's a lot of solidarity, but it's quite clear that the Extinction Rebellion activists get more fines and are treated differently and more violently, in fact. I think partly because it's not okay, at least physically, to treat indigenous activists badly, although legally, right, there's all kinds of really problematic you know, kind of illegal occupation and green colonialism going on. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marianne. Joanna had unmuted before, and then after that, Tim.
I have a lot of research questions for you. Some of them are like things I want to know about the individuals who step up for high risk action and these roles in the movement. Curious if any work has been done studying people's sensitivity That's the word that keeps coming to me. Like, I feel like I have always had a very strong sense of moral outrage, even as a kid. You know, everything, I was really in touch with my anger and my sense of justice. But something I've only come to as an adult is that one of the reasons I think for that is that I'm just super sensitive. I notice everything, I take everything in. I'm just wondering if that is a common thread among high profile activism. And also curious about family of origin, study of like people's birth order, dysfunction in that family, different things that could cause people to feel like they need to be responsible, which is my case. I'm also curious about studies of different countries and the political systems they're in, and whether coming from like a multi-party political system has a big difference. In the US, we have only 2 political parties, and it's seen as very dangerous to in any way criticize or challenge the Democrats at the moment because of the alternative, which is basically authoritarian fascism. But like, yeah, in countries that have more parliamentarian or other active parties, how does that impact people's involvement? I'm also interested in if anyone studied community impact. So like focus on an individual who's being targeted for repression, but then study how that affects not just their political affiliation or whatever movement they're out on the street for, but how does that affect their friends, their family? Because we're all interconnected, and when that repression comes down on the individual, it has an impact on the people who care about that individual. And then I'm also, I guess my last thing I'll throw out is just really interested in mind-body connection kind of things. If anybody's taken the study of repression to the health level, like seeing what kinds of impacts that stress on the individual has on people's health and well-being. Thanks.
Yeah, we can get several doctoral students to work on all of these questions. Thank you so much. We had Tim, and then after that, Jay.
Yeah, I had 2 responses to that lovely presentation. Before I do, I think Joanna just asked something that once made me realize maybe there's a 3rd question. But yeah, I'll start with Joanna's last comment, which was the health effects. Are you aware of the work of Rupa Maria? She's a medical practitioner, a doctor in San Francisco, and a musician and an activist. She co-authored a book with Raj Patel, who's at University of Texas in Austin, who's a degrowth scholar, and but they co-wrote a book called Deep Medicine, something about, no, it's called Inflamed, Deep Medicine and the Anatomy of Injustice. They talk about exactly this this exposome that we're all subject to by the powerful elite, the system of scarcity, and these traumas that we go through in all of our different ways and forms, no matter what socioeconomic backgrounds. But the interesting thing was these traumas are they're stored in the body, and you can inherit the side effects. And was one of them. They wrote it during the pandemic, and just really interesting, kind of circling back to this capitalist system that drives the climate crisis. So that was what I was thinking. But what I was going to respond to in terms of your second instrumental factors under the consolidating efficiencies. I think this is one of the hardest things in the United States, because I feel like being a climate activist, you're in the grocery store where there's too many boxes of cereal, and I just want a simple like Cheerios but I've got to go through, to be an activist in the United States, you've got so many choices. So anything we can do to counter the separation that we're all facing. Too many choices is one option, but we're also, we're divided socially by groups who don't feel like they can afford to be an activist in the climate space because they're too busy surviving. And so mutual aid groups, organized labor, and basic social movements for the repression that so many of us in the United States have seen by definition of the founding of our country, from indigenous genocide and land grab takeover, which is what our founding fathers, these land surveyor rich tycoons who created our government as a form of protection against further repression, to give us all that sense that we had a democracy, but they never trusted the American people with their money. The commoners, this isn't by the people, we the people government. This is just a facade, and we need to address that. We need to reinvent the Constitution. And how we're going to do that is we have a plan. And I was just listening to episode 30 of Designing the Revolution by Roger Hallam, where he talks about 4 elements: citizen assemblies, political parties, cultural movements, and sort of, just having that centeredness of culture in our communities all the way up to the national scale, and then direct actions, which is in our wheelhouse because we're activists. And so with these 4 elements, I highly recommend kind of reinforcing that research. Roger Hallam is a social scholar in practice and in theory. So it's his design that comes from Extinction Rebellion that gave us the A22 network that kind of keep all the projects together, which Declare Emergency is a member of. And he's also helped kind of push the 7 circles into existence. And before I talk too much, sorry, the last thing I was going to say is regarding risk-taking and responsibility. I've been conflict averse my whole life. I'm 54 and didn't get into like waking up and seeing that this problem that I had personally was everybody's problem because of the system. So I'm learning about politics. And one thing that really helped me as a parent with my 8-year-old son, who is a strong-willed tester, and he could bring me to my knees by not listening to anything I was trying to offer as a parent, was this book called Conscious Discipline: 7 Skills for Turning Conflict into Cooperation. And it's by, I think, a researcher, clinical social scientist, I think, Becky Bailey, who is centering parenting around 7 powers of self-control that you have to do as a parent in order to have these skills, in order to teach these 7 values. She's got a beautiful system. And she says in the beginning of her book that, if we could just all do this as grown-ups and parents and neighbors and citizens, we might actually have a shot at democracy, because it does start with personal self-responsibility. And I'll check there. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. Jay is next, and then Tatiana. And then I think we heard from all the activists.
Awesome. Well, good luck to anybody responding to all that. I'm trying to just absorb Tim's and Joanna's and everybody of these insights. I think that the key thing that stood out to me, I love, and just absorbing, hearing the different factors, and the fear component's really interesting. Maybe it's hard to track and there's not so much correlation, but we're all obviously pretty afraid of what the future could hold. And so anyway, I just celebrate this approach. And I guess one idea of something that feels the most relevant to me, and like how I can keep in this movement, and how I know I see a lot of people, comrades in this room, that have I think echoed this in practice and in their words, that when we are first radicalized, we're first mobilized, it's usually by outrage. We're usually like deeply outraged that this injustice exists, and what can we do against it? And that is an amazing like initiating force. But I think without the love and without the community and that support that you find with others that are outraged, it's impossible to stay in it. And so I think that with Climate Defiance, with Seven Circles Alliance, like our community that we've had, we come back because we know we have each other's backs. And when someone was talking about the grief, I think it was Marion maybe, or but the grief and support groups, you know, those to express this depth of emotion and complexity behind it and why people don't get it, and just all of this, like, I think the component of love and community and togetherness is like the thing that will sustain us, because outrage is always going to be there. But I just have found in about a year now of doing it that the community and the connection with those who also see it and care about us getting there together is just one of the most powerful sustaining aspects to this. And I don't know if that could be quantified or studied. I know that is probably a tricky one, but in the community and love sense, I think that would be super powerful. Yeah, check.
Thank you, Jay. And it reminds me of the Extinction Rebellion sign-off, oftentimes in love and rage, right? That's that combination of emotions, also the positive and not just the negative affect. Absolutely. All right, Tatiana, last but not least.
So I just wanted to thank Arin for the presentation and for everyone here with their inputs. I'm curious, when they talked about fear in the study, if it was fear of state repression or fear about the subject that was motivating the individual to act. So I don't know if there was like disambiguation of that in the study when you were looking at fear. And to the point that I believe Joanna had made before about people's backgrounds informing their current realities, I wonder how much like issues like personal or intergenerational trauma play into a greater sense of empathy and therefore like the moral certainty that one needs to act. And I found it kind of positive that repression has a galvanizing and radicalizing effect. And I wonder about looking at that both internally and externally. So, you know, one of the theories of change, right, of nonviolent civil disobedience is that not only you yourself are well, I should put it this way, that outsiders seeing the repression of the state against people who are not engaging in activities that warrant such you know, crackdowns, et cetera, such repressive and harsh behaviors, that those bystanders then would be motivated to act, or at least be motivated to call out on the outrage of what's being done. So I wonder if there's a sort of lens to look at both the internal motivator and the external impact on the observers. And I think lastly, because I support so many media teams, like the one lens I'm always looking at everything through is communication. So as far as next steps for research, I would be curious to know, how do we integrate this into our communications to be more effective in getting people to join our movements or stand up or join any movement, right? Because I think the right does a really good job of using fear. And I think the left has stayed away from it because we see it as manipulative, but there's, you know, plenty of cause for rage and fear on our side. And I think maybe having findings to point to that could give us an ethical pathway to utilizing it would be incredibly powerful.
Thank you, Tatiana. And that's actually a really good keyword for me to send through the chat. I was going to do this at the end of the call, but we need more social scientists in the climate movement. In Scientist Rebellion would be one obvious place to start if you're already a scientist, but there are a bunch of other movements where you can join, and we really just need to bring in the knowledge we have about how to communicate these findings, what will mobilize and motivate people, right? How to address issues of fear and all of that into the movement. So if you aren't already part of a climate group, please find one and join. And as I said, Scientist Rebellion, that a few of us are part of, and I'm happy to answer questions about that group, would be one obvious place to start if you are already a researcher. Janine wanted to add something, and then we'll see if Arin wants to respond to anything, although I didn't prepare Arin to, I don't think it will be possible to address everything, but maybe there's one or two things you would like to respond, but you don't have the full responsibility to address everything for sure. But first, Janine, what would you like to add?
Okay, thank you for giving the word. Do you hear me well now?
A bit better than before, I think, yes.
Okay. So I just wanted to mention that one of the latest things after my court experience and several arrests or whatever, we're now focusing a little. I am personally, but also there's a group focusing on necessity defense and trying to actually make sure that our actions are designed around that. And maybe that's something Ayanian could also, or social scientists could also work on to help us understand how we align our action with both what the public needs, but also with how we fight the court process.
Yeah, thank you. And I see actually Troy Horton in the room. So Troy works on climate necessity defense within Scientist Rebellion, and I imagine not everyone here in the room knows what that even means. So Troy or Janine, would you like to say just one or two sentences about what climate necessity defense is and how you would get involved with that?
Go ahead, Troy.
We have a group that's actively trying to educate activists in terms of doing an action that is going to be effective in court. And we are trying to find expert witnesses through the scientific and academic arenas that will help those court cases. If we can fill the courts up with cases and educate the public in the courts through actions that end up being successful, this could have a tremendous effect for bringing in more activists who feel they now have a tool to work with. So that's a real brief description, but if you look at Scientist Rebellion, or if you have any interest in learning more about that or helping with that, please let us know and we can get information to you. Janine's a good, very good contact, and myself. Check.
Thank you, Troy. All right. As I feared, with so much rich experience in the room, we are slowly starting to run out of time, and there won't be enough time to go into all the depth that we would like to discuss. But I think what I'm going to do is look at all the notes and think about organizing a follow-up session, perhaps based on the questions and gaps we had here. But we do still have 12 minutes officially. So Arin, without addressing everything, that's obviously impossible, and we don't yet have research on all the questions that were asked, but we took a lot of notes, and I think this will inform our research. But is there anything you would like to respond to or add based on what was asked and suggested?
Sure. So as you mentioned, Johanna, the issue with social psychology is that we just recently started looking at how repression affects collective action at an individual level. So it's been only 10 years or so, and research is only now picking up. So we have lots of areas that we still need to tackle. That includes, for instance, looking at how repression affects the psychological well-being of the protesters, not only in environmental groups, but also on a political and social level. We are lacking the study of psychological traits, personality traits, ideological alignments, and how that affects your engagement in or disengagement from collective action. What I can say is about the importance of socialization. There are few research, qualitative mostly, looking at how the first movers, who are considered to be the ones who are organizing the protests and engaging in high-risk activities, usually come from families who the parents already have been repressed in the past. So they grow up in a system where as you said, the critical thinking or being sensitive to injustices is already there. So there I would expect Tatiana to have the generational trauma and the injustices that one lives throughout history, but also throughout their lives, would affect their readiness to get engaged before anyone else. And also here you would have the role of friendships or social network and the support of the social network. So the more connected you are to activists or people who have been repressed. So when you witnessed repression, either online, personally, or someone you know, you are more likely to get engaged. But I have to say that the research that I am referring to is not on environmental research, but I would expect the results of repression and collective action and the antecedents to generalize to environmental movements. The fear I was referring to and the research has covered looks at fear from repression. So fear of being a victim of the various risks, and also anger. It's anger towards the police repression rather than anger towards the lack of environmental awareness or the action or what is happening to the environment. So you can say that we're looking at repression as the main grievance in the studies we've covered.
Erin, you muted yourself.
Yes,
Yeah.
sorry. And being labeled radical and terrorist is one of the strong or recent ways of the government oppressing any kind of collective action that challenges the status quo. Environmentalists are getting it very often now, and it's becoming more and more the common practice. Pro-Palestinian protests now, you are at risk of being called pro-terrorist whenever you say pro-Palestine, for instance. Living in Germany, I'm very aware of that. Unfortunately, we don't have the fine distinction between high-level risks and low-level risks and how these different types of risks affect. There are few research differentiating the different dimensions, typologies of repression, but there's so much work still needed to see how these different types of risks affect different types of collective action, being it online, being it offline, being it normative, non-normative, etc. Let me see whether I have anything else. No, Johanna, you can help me if I missed anything.
I mean, there is so much to discuss. I'm really starting to think I need to do a follow-up to just address all the questions and comments that were added. But this is great because it stimulates many ideas. And we can give you a break in responding, Arin. Tim, you had your hand up before. Did you want to add something? Or was that just a thumbs up?
Thank you. I was going to ask a follow-up question to what I just heard, which is, if the common denominator of repression in all of its forms is separation from each other, separation from our nature, which is the fact that we came from the natural world and now we're separated from it, which was required for colonization, and it's still happening today. With the stories that we tell ourselves in our Western modern societies, would the research support anything that we can do in our 8 billion person population on this planet as global citizens to overcome that separation, where we need like a kind of collective way to identify ourselves as humans or as earthlings that has a political teeth in it. And I'm just wondering, yeah, how can we do that? Like bring all of these repressed groups together? Because we all share that. I mean, we're at the receiving end of the elite, powerful, the powerful corporate elite playbook, which is divide and conquer. And that's a question. Thank you.
I think from my research and when I talk with activists, repression fails to divide. If anything, repression is making the movement more solid. It strengthens the links. A lot of the protesters I talked to in Egypt, for instance, they would consider the protesters as their family. It's where they feel safe. And they would tell you, even if I don't know them personally, they are my brothers and sisters. So I think what they're doing is actually the opposite. They are creating a strong community that is ready to risk their lives for the others. But the important point you've mentioned is to create alliances between the various movements across the globe who are being repressed. And I think that would create an extremely strong activist community who can learn from each other experiences, specifically related to how to overcome the repression by the authorities. And I think if that community also includes the scientists and their expertise, I think then the governments would have tough times. Even now they have it, but I think we would have a greater chance of achieving change.
We only have 3 more minutes left. I saw there is a very active discussion in the chat that I wasn't able to follow, but I will save it and can email the content without the names to anyone who would like to have it. In the last few minutes that we have, are there any? Well, first of all, there was nothing on the Jamboard actually, so I would encourage you, because we like to. I mean, I'll save some comments from the Jamboard.
There actually is a.
Oh, there is?
Yeah.
Where? I can't
There's a
see.
lot of them. There's like at least 10.
Slide 5.
Slide 5. Slide 5 is the former session. Okay, anyway, I will figure out the Jamboard later.
January 10, because the other ones are old slides.
Okay, maybe I need to refresh my browser. Anyway, in the last minutes we have, and again, there's too much now to cover all the questions, and I think I need to figure out a follow-up session to this. But are there any points, observations, important issues that have not been raised yet that you would like us to hear or address? Troy.
Just quickly, I think focusing on the 3%, 5% of people that are willing to take significant risks is something that we should really consider. Is that a priority versus trying to, for example, get the Trumpies to see the light? So just in terms of a research sort of thinking, I would think if we could get 5% of our population taking significant risks, we can win, and that should be a focus. Check.
Right, and there's another important document on kind of another classification, I think, by the Yale Climate Communication Group that distinguishes between people who are activated, alarmed, right, or like alarmed but not yet activated, and that can be really useful for us to focus on. And obviously the climate denialists we just ignore for now. Other points or comments or questions that you would like us all to take away from this?
Just
Can I
topping
make a
on what
reaction?
I'm sorry.
Sorry, Marion. Go ahead.
And sorry, including the audience members, so people who didn't have a chance yet to ask something, or something from the chat that you would like to highlight.
Can I make a reaction to what Tim said about Kellogg's box? I see the movements around the world as more like a piano with many different keys. So sometimes you play a Fridays for Future, sometimes you play the Extinction Rebellion, sometimes you play Scientist Rebellion, and everybody has their own keyboard, and sometimes we're in harmony and sometimes we're out of harmony. And that way it helps you sort of enjoy the diversity. It was just a reaction.
I think my question was, how do I find the other the likely people to recruit? If you know, that's sort of my big question. How do I identify them? What do they look like? What kind of personality type do they have? if they don't already have a moral outrage, is it generated? Can we generate it, or is that just something that, you know? So though, like, sort of understanding in order to know who to mobilize and who is likely to be able to be motivated. That's sort of my big question.
Yeah, so basically creating profiles of already existing people who were mobilized and then using that to communicate towards greater mobilization. That's really important, I think. Fuad, you came on the screen. Would you like to say something?
Yes, I was just going to, at the end of all the comments, I was going to share some links as well for people to see our schedule and our website and all of that. But let's just see if anybody else has any last points that they'd like to.
I think one thing too. Oh, Joanna, you want to go?
Go ahead.
Oh, just super briefly, I think that like with who we've seen taking action, like literally people come and say like, I have climate anxiety. I'm here with you to express like that anxiety. And so I think like, yeah, I'm sure there's a lot of study about it, but I think that how the anxiety is lessened by action, it's been a huge pipeline. Well, I don't want to say pipeline. It's been a huge source for people and expressing that. So anyway, thanks everybody so much.
And just quickly, I wanted to throw in a linguistics request, maybe more of a humanities request, but some further study around how we frame what we call ourselves, and it's specifically in terms of this word radical, which can be really off-putting to people. They are really scared by that phrase, and I would love for ours to be the normal approach. You know, I want ours to be the, you know, what everyone does. So just, yeah, more around wording.
Do you have any suggestions?
Yeah, I just feel like it's not a suggestion. It's just a sadness that the right is so much better at coming up with kind of catchy phrases and things that stick. And they're generally mean-spirited and kind of nasty, but maybe there's something in there that respond. I don't know, like that seems to be what gets traction. And our message is, you know, for hope and togetherness, and that doesn't resonate for some reason. So yeah, we need to play around with our language more.
People of conscience is maybe one term.
Thank you, everybody. So I'm just going to share some links for you.
So what Fuad is sharing now will be basically how to stay in touch with this series. You may be interested in other sessions. We do these bi-weekly. It's usually not on climate, but other contexts of repression. But I think a lot of issues kind of generalize across different contexts, and it's all connected, as we heard several times here today about Palestine, imperialism, capitalism. Everything is connected, and those in power are repressing all of our movements, so we can learn from each other. So we have, what, did you already put it in the link? I think I'm not seeing the updates, but there's a website you can go to where there is a form to sign up for getting our updates by email. So then you'll get the flyers for the sessions, including if we decide to organize based on all of the comments here and suggestions and issues that came up, a follow-up session, we would communicate it there. And if you are a researcher and would like to offer a session in the series, if you're a social scientist and work on repression and resistance, you can also propose a session in the series. There's a separate link for that. Anything else? Oh yes, the recording from the session will also be on our website, so you can access it there. And you can also contact us if you would like to have, for example, the notes from the chat. I'll clean it up from personal information, but anyone who wasn't able to save all of the rich information from the chat, you can email us. We have an address there, or you can email me directly and we'll send it to you. I think that's all. Fuad, anything else?
Thank you, everybody, for being here, and for the activists as well for sharing your experiences. This has been very, very stimulating, and hopefully it'll lead us to be able to provide something more concrete and useful for you in the future. in terms of our own research.
Yes, we will keep going and be informed by what you shared with us. So thank you again so much for joining, for taking this time to share. Thank you.